Did you know cigarettes were just as common in a soldier's kit as bullets and rations during World War II? Some brands were so strong and cheap that they practically defined army life, keeping spirits up in the toughest conditions. From Woodbines to Navy Cut to Capstan, these smokes became legends of the battlefield. In this video, we're taking a look at 10 cigarette brands British soldiers smoked in World War II that you'll never see on shop shelves again. Kicking things off with an American classic, Lucky Strike. When the US joined World War II, the American government worked with tobacco companies to include cigarettes in military rations. Lucky Strike quickly became one of the most widely distributed brands in the world. Soldiers in Europe and the Pacific could count on finding those familiar green or red packs tucked into their rations, and British troops often swapped or purchased them whenever American supplies were nearby. The brand became synonymous with the American war effort, so much so that it was immortalized in countless photos of GIs lighting up at camp or on the march. For British soldiers, Lucky Strikes were an exotic and slightly glamorous alternative to homegrown brands like Woodbine or Senior Service. They carried an air of GI cool and were often prized in trade. A pack of Lucky Strikes could get you small favours or even better food from someone with access. The cigarettes themselves were stronger than many British blends, with a bold, toasted flavour that stood out at the time. After the war, Lucky Strike continued as a global brand, but the wartime aura around it slowly faded. While the name survives abroad, the exact unfiltered packs that fueled World War II soldiers' habits are long gone from today's UK shelves. When talking about wartime smoking habits, Craven A stands out as one of the most recognisable cigarette brands among British soldiers in the 1940s. Produced by Carreras Tobacco Company, its black packet with the red cat logo was instantly recognisable, even on the front lines. Unlike the harsher soldiers' smokes such as Woodbine, Craven A was marketed as a smoother, less irritating option. Its famous slogan, "Will not affect your throat," made it especially appealing to men already dealing with harsh battlefield conditions, dust, and stress on their lungs. During World War II, Craven A was included in NAAFI canteens and Red Cross parcels, making it accessible not only to British soldiers, but also to Commonwealth troops. Cigarettes were considered a comfort item in ration packs, and for many men, a packet of Craven A provided a brief escape from the grind of military service. Letters and memoirs from soldiers often mention brand preferences, with Craven A remembered as one of the better smokes compared to the cheaper, harsher brands handed out in bulk. Craven A's reputation for quality made it a sought-after trade item among troops. Soldiers frequently bartered cigarettes with each other, and even with civilians in occupied Europe, and Craven A held its value. Though still produced today in limited markets abroad, its wartime prominence in British Army culture has long since faded, leaving Craven A as a nostalgic symbol of smoking in the Second World War. Among the many cigarette brands that British soldiers encountered in World War II, V cigarettes hold a special, if not infamous, place. Unlike popular names such as Woodbine or Players, V was a wartime product made primarily in India for distribution to British and Commonwealth forces overseas. Their plain packaging and basic tobacco reflected the shortages of the time, but what made V memorable was the soldiers' near-universal dislike for them. In fact, official records in the UK Parliament's Hansard debates show that complaints about V cigarettes reached the House of Commons in 1944. Members of Parliament reported that troops in Italy and India were unhappy with the quality, describing them as harsh, inferior, and unsuitable compared to other brands. Despite the War Office's announcement that manufacture had been abandoned in August 1943, soldiers were still finding V cigarettes in their rations months later. The matter was serious enough that MPs pressed ministers to ensure the brand was fully withdrawn and replaced with better quality options. The Imperial War Museums also preserve packs of V cigarettes as part of their World War II collection, tying them to the lived experiences of regiments in Italy, including those who fought at Cassino. For many veterans, the memory of V was less about enjoyment and more about frustration, though. In desperate moments, even a disliked cigarette could provide a small comfort. Today, V remains a reminder of how deeply smoking was woven into military life, even when the tobacco itself left much to be desired. Few cigarette brands carried such an unmistakably military identity as Army Club. Launched by Cavendish Limited, this brand was already on the market before the Second World War, but its popularity soared once war broke out. Packaged in simple white packets, featuring the iconic figure of a soldier in uniform, Army Club marketed itself directly to servicemen. And during the war, it lived up to its name by becoming a familiar sight in the kits of British troops. Unlike makeshift wartime products such as V-cigarettes, Army Club had a reputation for decent quality Virginia tobacco. Soldiers often mentioned them as a welcome alternative to the harsher, mass-produced options they received in bulk. In NAAFI canteens and rations, a packet of Army Club was considered a comfort item, something that provided both taste and a morale boost. Many men associated the brand with moments of rest, smoking during a lull in battle, on long marches, or while sharing a light with comrades in the trenches and camps. The brand's strong wartime connection turned Army Club into more than just a cigarette. It became a cultural marker of the British Army experience. Its packaging and name reinforced its image as the soldier's smoke, and the cigarettes were even traded between soldiers and civilians in Europe, a form of currency that underlined their value. Although Army Club survived after 1945, it eventually disappeared from the market in later decades, leaving behind its wartime legacy as one of the most iconic smokes associated with Britain's fighting men. Not all wartime cigarettes carried glamorous reputations, and Park Drive is a prime example. Produced by Gallagher Limited, Park Drive was one of the cheapest and most widely available cigarettes in Britain during the 1930s and 1940s. Its affordability and strong rough smoke made it especially popular among working-class men, which naturally included the ranks of the British Army once war began. Soldiers often joked about Park Drive being harsh on the throat, but in the shortages of wartime, a cigarette was better than none. Park Drive was issued through NAAFI canteens and could also be found in Red Cross parcels, making it a consistent part of military life. Compared to premium brands like Craven A or Senior Service, Park Drive was considered less refined, but its accessibility gave it a loyal following. Soldiers frequently bartered Park Drive cigarettes among themselves and with civilians in occupied Europe, where even a rough smoke carried value. The brand's identity was tied to its plain packaging and reputation as a no-nonsense cigarette. In memoirs and oral histories, veterans often recall Park Drive as one of the everyday smokes of service life, the sort of cigarette that appeared in ration tins and filled countless moments of waiting, marching, or resting between battles. Though Park Drive lingered on the UK market for decades after the war, it eventually vanished. Among the many cigarette brands tied to Britain's fighting men, Senior Service stood out as one of the most premium. Produced by Gallagher Limited and launched in 1925, it was named after the Royal Navy, the senior service of the British Armed Forces, and its branding carried a strong naval theme. With its blue and white packets and anchor emblem, Senior Service appealed directly to servicemen and projected an image of strength, quality, and patriotism. Unlike cheaper brands such as Park Drive or Woodbine, Senior Service offered smoother, Virginia-based tobacco that was marketed as higher quality. It wasn't as common in standard ration issues, but soldiers and sailors who could afford them often preferred senior service for its cleaner taste and less abrasive smoke. Veterans' memoirs and advertisements of the era reinforced the brand's reputation as something of a luxury item among troops, more likely to be purchased in NA/AFI canteens than handed out in bulk. Still, senior service cigarettes made their way into wartime life in significant numbers. They were traded among soldiers and civilians, and even used as a form of social currency, much like other brands. The prestige associated with the packet made them desirable for bartering and for gifting. A pack of senior service carried weight beyond its tobacco. After the war, the brand continued for decades, remembered not only for its distinct naval theme, but also for the loyalty it inspired among soldiers who associated it with moments of respite during a long and difficult conflict. Long before the war, Carreras Tobacco Company had made Black Cat one of the most recognisable cigarette brands in Britain, and its presence carried through to the battlefield. Known for its bold black packets with the striking cat logo, Black Cat offered a smoother smoke compared to the harsher working-class staples like Woodbine or Park Drive. This made it especially popular with soldiers who preferred a cigarette that felt a little more refined, even when smoked in the mud of a trench or the dust of North Africa. Black Cat was also unusual in its marketing. The brand had long emphasised quality Virginia tobacco and had built a reputation as a cooler smoke, less likely to irritate the throat. That made it attractive to soldiers already exposed to dust, gas, and exhaustion, conditions that made harsher brands even more punishing. Packs of Black Cat often appeared in NA/AFI canteens and Red Cross parcels, where troops looked for something beyond the standard ration issues. While not the most common brand at the front, Black Cat earned a steady following and could be found in bartering exchanges between soldiers and civilians. Its distinctive packaging gave it trading value, and even small comforts like a recognisable packet could carry weight far from home. Today, Black Cat survives in the historical record more as an emblem of Carreras' innovation and design. But for the soldiers who smoked it, the brand represented a brief escape into familiarity during one of the most disruptive periods of their lives. Among the cigarettes most closely tied to British military life in World War II, Capstan was a name soldiers knew well. Produced by WD and H.O. Wills, the brand was available in different strengths, with Capstan Full Strength earning a reputation for being one of the strongest smokes on the market. For soldiers enduring long hours in hostile environments, that intensity made Capstan both a comfort and, at times, a challenge. Capstan was widely distributed through NA/AFI canteens and appeared in service rations, giving it a strong presence among troops at home and overseas. Veterans often recalled Capstan as a cigarette with real kick, a sharp, strong flavour that set it apart from milder brands like Craven A or Black Cat. For working-class soldiers used to robust tobacco before enlistment, Capstan felt familiar and reliable, a connection to everyday life back in Britain. The brand also carried symbolic weight. Its sturdy, no-frills image matched the resilience expected of soldiers in the field. Cigarettes often served as social glue, and Capstan was no exception. Soldiers would share or trade them, reinforcing bonds within units. Its strength even became part of its legend, with some men joking that smoking Capstan was as punishing as facing the enemy. Though Capstan continued for decades after the war, its wartime role cemented its reputation. For many veterans, the name evokes both the toughness of the cigarette itself and the toughness required to get through the most difficult years of their service. Few cigarette brands were as iconic to British soldiers in the Second World War as Player's Navy Cut. Produced by John Player and Sons, its packet, marked by the sailor's head, framed in a lifebuoy, was instantly recognisable and symbolically linked to Britain's naval heritage. The brand had existed since the late 19th century, but by the 1940s it had become a staple for both civilians and servicemen, making its way into ration issues and NAAFI canteens. Players' Navy Cut offered a medium-bodied Virginia tobacco that struck a balance between strength and smoothness, appealing to a broad spectrum of smokers. Unlike harsher brands such as Woodbine or Capstan, Navy Cut was often remembered as a more approachable cigarette, something soldiers could smoke repeatedly without the same bite to the throat. Its balance made it a dependable choice for men serving in varied conditions, from the North African deserts to the European front. The brand also carried strong cultural associations. The Lifebuoy sailor logo was widely seen as a patriotic image, reinforcing connections to the Royal Navy and Britain's maritime power. This helped Players' Navy Cut stand out not only as a cigarette, but also as a morale booster, a small reminder of national identity tucked into a uniform pocket. Though production of Players' Navy Cut continued after the war, its strongest legacy is tied to the servicemen who smoked it during the 1940s. For many veterans, the sight of that sailor's head remains inseparable from memories of military life in wartime. If there was one cigarette that truly earned the title of the soldier's smoke in World War II, it was Woodbine. Produced by WD and WWII, Woodbine was already a working-class favourite in Britain before the war, sold cheaply and known for its unfiltered, full-bodied strength. When millions of men were conscripted, they brought their habits with them, and Woodbine quickly became the dominant brand in barracks, trenches, and battlefields. The cigarette's reputation came from its raw intensity. Veterans often joked that Woodbine was so strong it could knock you over, but that very harshness gave it an edge for soldiers used to tough conditions. It wasn't smooth or refined, but it delivered a quick hit of nicotine that cut through exhaustion and nerves. In a world where comfort was scarce, that familiar burn became oddly reassuring. Woodbine's ubiquity was also practical. It was cheap, widely available through NAAFI canteens, and frequently included in rations or Red Cross parcels. Because of this, it turned into a kind of social currency. Soldiers swapped Woodbines, lit them for each other before combat, and used them to bond during the endless waiting that defined military life. The brand became so synonymous with wartime smoking that Woodbine almost became shorthand for a cigarette itself. Although Woodbine survived well into the late 20th century, its strongest cultural association is with the men of World War II. To this day, it remains remembered not just as a brand, but as the cigarette that marched alongside Britain's army through the hardest years of the war. And that's it for today's trip down memory lane. Give it a like if you remembered some of these cigarettes, or if you learned something new, and don't forget to subscribe for more information and nostalgia. See you next time.